Hey y'all, before we get into this video, I want to share with you an email that I got a few weeks ago, maybe actually a couple of weeks ago, from a friend I've made out west. His name is Dusty, and he lives really, I don't know if it's the wilderness or what, but he sent me pictures of his place, and there's grizzly bears in his front yard. So he lives in a wild place. But he's an attorney. He was a judge. I don't know if he's retired or what, but he's just a damn good guy. And he sent me this email. It's not a story, but it's something to really think about, and I wanted to read it to you. He writes, I spent the better part of 5 decades unraveling extremely difficult situations in an effort to discard the irrelevant facts and apply the correct law to the relevant facts. I excelled at this. There is a common denominator in this entire Sasquatch, dogman, alien picture that can't be overlooked, that is the government's harsh and volatile reaction to those who might reveal aspects of their encounters with these entities. If you recall the Skinwalker Ranch scenario, Sasquatch and dogman-like creatures were actually seen documented coming out of portals. Creatures were shot out of trees on the ranch and shot at such extreme close range that hunks of meat were seen flying off the creatures, only to have their tracks literally vanish into thin air when they were followed into the bush by expert Indian trackers. Likewise, and to an even much greater extent, the Stardust Ranch scenario, where a myriad of strange and bizarre aliens and cryptid creatures were witnessed exiting portals. The Four Corners section of the U.S., where Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and New Mexico meet, is apparently littered with these portals and is a hotbed of cryptid activity. Whether these portals are pathways to different dimensions or galaxies, I know not, but one thing is consistent, and that is the zealous and hostile manner in which the government attempts to cover up these events. The reaction of the U.S. government to the Rendlesham Forest incident, where UFOs landed at a British Air Force base being operated by the U.S. in England, or the Roswell debacle, and so many more, was to threaten witnesses with loss of jobs, reputations, livelihoods, and even their lives if they reveal that which they witnessed. One GI who witnessed the event called his mother from an off-base payphone. He was dishonorably discharged and his life was ruined. Others high up in government who dare divulge this information have met untimely ends. Those reporting serious conflicts with dogmen go on to recite that the proverbial men in black show up, hunt down the creature, and then remove all trail cams on the individual's properties, as well as removing hard drives from computers in their homes before disappearing forever. As you are well aware, this is not an uncommon occurrence. So what's the common denominator? The government reacts harshly and covertly in both instances. They treat UFO encounters and abductions in the same manner that they treat serious conflicts with cryptids and humans. In very serious cases where groups of Sasquatches have terrorized a farm or ranch, the feds buy the property and then literally burn the structures to the ground and destroy all evidence of the altercations. Robert Bigelow, a billionaire who purchased and scientifically studied the Skinwalker Ranch, formed the National Institute for the Discovery of Science, which operated until 2004. The organization is later replaced by the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. This guy is no lightweight. His investigation, which utilized the services of top-notch technical and scientific minds, points conclusively to the link between cryptids and alien beings. They're linked, Cam. As much as I hate to admit it, and as many times as I have rejected it, the accounts in serious scientific studies point conclusively to the conclusion that the Earth is not the natural habitat of these beings. Strange lights are reported around them. They seem to be able to vanish into thin air. It all adds up. The government will discard the Constitution and all the rights of associated therewith to protect the secret that aliens exist and cryptids are part and parcel of the program. I have no one else to blow this by. Dusty writes, I have no one else to blow this by, so I thought I'd pick on you. Oh, look, here come the men in white coats to take me back to my home. I hope I haven't missed the apple cobbler. Keep up the good work, Dusty. I told you he's a good guy. He's got a great sense of humor, and I love getting emails from him and corresponding with him. Heck, I think we're about to start doing some interviews, maybe in some upcoming videos, and I thought Dusty would be an awesome, awesome guy to have on. I'd love to hear him vocalize and verbalize his opinions on some of this stuff. He's an attorney, he's a judge, he knows how to speak in public, and he would probably be great on an audio interview. So I may get in touch with him on that. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. That is some really, I don't think I've ever read a commentary that is so to the point and direct. Again, that's what he says he does or did in his trade as an attorney and as a judge. I thought it was fascinating. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Now, let's get on with the video. All right, here we go. About 2 months ago, I put up a video called Bigfoot Sends Tweakers Running. It was a video, I think it had 2 stories in it, and both stories were handwritten, and they were both great. I mean, they were really good. But the second story was by a guy named Russell, who I think out in Oklahoma, he had some strange interactions with a Bigfoot and ran into some trouble with some dope heads, and the Bigfoot ran him off. And it was a great story. But at the end of the story, he mentioned that he had a story about a squirrel. And I guess through popular demand in the comments, people were like, oh, I want to hear the squirrel story. Got to hear the squirrel story. So last week, or no, maybe 2 weeks ago, I was checking my post office box, and there was another handwritten letter from Rusty. And it is the story about the squirrel. I'm going to put a little iCard above here. I'll tell you what I'll do. The end screen of this video will have that Tweakers video. So if you want to watch it and listen to Rusty's original story about the Bigfoot, you can click on that video at the very end of this video. But this is the story about the snake and the squirrel. And Rusty writes, in the early 80s, I was 20. Most of my friends and I didn't have families or careers yet, so we had plenty of free time to fish and hunt. That is, if we had a little money for gas and maybe some beer. $10 meant both back then. I had just finished up a job and got paid for it. I called up my buddies, Bullet and Jack, and I said, let's go fishing. We all did that if one of us had money because we all shared it. We borrowed Jack's brother's John boat and went down to one of the little rivers that flow in and out of the Great Dismal Swamp in northeast North Carolina. It was a beautiful day, early fall, but still warm enough for shorts. We slid the boat into the water and started out. We always paddled upstream then and drifted back down. Those were small, slow, flowing rivers, so it was easy going. We were catching fish like always, keeping only the bigger ones, perch, bass, and catfish. That was when we realized that you can catch catfish on lures. Anyway, we had gone about a mile up and half of the 12-pack was gone. It had just disappeared. So we turned around and started drifting back. In North Carolina, nothing runs in a straight line, especially the waterways. It was a good day of fishing with friends and stories. Then, just around the next bend, we could hear a squirrel chattering. Then we heard a splash in the water, and then more splashing and squeals from the squirrel. We all looked at each other asking, what in the world is going on over there? We all put our rods up, and Jack and Bullet started paddling towards the ruckus with me sitting on the bow. When we rounded the bend, we could see a snake wound around a squirrel. The squirrel was struggling and biting at the snake. Now, you would think it was a moccasin being near the water and all, but it wasn't. It was just a regular old snake. Later on, we figured the squirrel jumped on the snake and started fighting it. I had to break it up somehow. I told the guys to get me close. I started to whack the ball of snake and fur with the end of my rod, and eventually the snake uncoiled itself and swam off. The squirrel, however, wasn't doing so well. I could see it wasn't going to make it back to the bank, so I put the tip of the rod in the water and the squirrel latched on. I pulled it right up into the boat with us. It was something right out of a Warner Brothers cartoon. A half-drowned squirrel, coughing and spitting out water, sitting on the bow of the boat right beside me. Bullet and Jack never said a word. When I turned to look at them, I could see why. Both of their jaws were in their laps, and their eyes were as big as saucers. I said, "Let's get him to the bank." They got us right up to the bank, but the squirrel just sat there shivering and coughing. It took about a minute, but the squirrel finally hopped off. He didn't run, but walked only a few feet, and he turned and he chirped at us, as if to say thanks, and then ran to the nearest tree, and he disappeared. I turned to look at the guys again, and that's when I had the biggest laugh I can remember ever having. We went back to town to tell the story. No one believed us, but it's another one of those believe it or leave it alone stories. And he signs off Rusty. So that's not a Bigfoot story. It's not a cryptid story, but it's a great story. It's just a great story. And Rusty's a good writer. This is handwritten. There are no corrections, no whiteouts, no scribble outs or anything. Unless he just well, there's one scribble out. Rusty, you messed up one time. But he's a great writer, and I really appreciate it. And Rusty, if you ever want to send another letter to my P.O. Box brother, you send it on. I will get it in a video because these are just great. All right, let's go to another one. Here's a story that I don't think I've ever heard anything like this. You'll have to listen to the end to know what I'm talking about, but this is fascinating, and let's just get into it. The writer's name is Steve. He says, "I've recently began listening to your stories about Bigfoot. It seems the creatures are widespread and not just restricted to any certain area. I once thought if they existed at all, it was only in the northwest states of Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. This is the reason I'm writing you about incidents closer to my home here in Texas. My name is Steve, and I'm 69 years old. I was born and raised in Texas and have been involved with scouting since I was 7. I have backpacked extensively over the years and enjoy fishing, hunting, and so I would say that I'm the outdoors type. However, I'm not able to get out much now due to the issues I have with my back. The first incident happened in 1977 at Philmont Scout Ranch, which is in northern New Mexico. I was not on this particular trek, but a friend of mine was, and this is his story. Harry had just turned 21, so he was the adult advisor for this crew of 7 scouts. These guys were older teens, meaning they were 16 to 17 years old. They had all been to Philmont before, so they were not newbies. One evening, they were sitting around their campfire, and after dinner, it suddenly became very quiet. It was as if a sudden hush had fallen. It was so abrupt that they all noticed it and were looking at each other. A huge black shape was seen as it bounded silently from the woods at the edge of the meadow. There were some huge logs on the ground in the middle of this mountain meadow, and this dark shape went from the woods to the first log, then to the second log, and to the third log before it vanished from sight. The distance from the woods to the far side of the meadow is probably 150 to 200 yards across. This thing that they saw made the crossing in just a few seconds before it vanished. Needless to say, the group was very spooked by what they had seen. Finally, Harry spoke up. That was the first sound anyone had made. They all got up and went over to where they first spotted the black object. Even though it had recently rained and the ground was soft, they found no tracks. They followed the course that it took all the way to the other side of the meadow, and still no tracks. They were so shaken that instead of setting up their individual tents, they slept all together under the dining fly. All during the night, They were fighting each other for the centermost spot. No one, I don't know why I think that's funny, but it's really not, but it kind of is. No one wanted to be on the outside edge. In the morning, they were all packed up and ready to roll within 5 minutes. They hit the trail, still edgy, and there was more than one look behind their backs. They left the area, but this is not the end of the story. 20 years later, in 1997, Harry was again the adult advisor. This time we had 2 crews, and I was the adult advisor for the second crew. While at the base camp, we made a plan for the coming days. One night was to be spent in Santa Claus, the same spot where Harry had his experience in 1977. We opted not to stay in that campsite, but to hike on a few miles to the next one. I was teasing Harry and generally giving him a hard time. It so happened that my crew was ahead of Harry's, and I had my crew stop at Santa Claus for about a 10-minute break. It was a beautiful meadow and the birds were singing. And then the woods became hushed, and then all was quiet. Harry and his crew rounded the bend and came into view. When Harry and his group walked into the meadow, the silence was broken by the loud cawing of crows. Harry said not a word as he passed by, but was nervously looking around. His face was pale. The crows kept up the racket the whole time Harry was in the meadow. It continued until he crossed through to the other side, and then the noise from the crows abruptly stopped. We never saw a crow in the air or roosting in a tree. There was no question that the crows were close. The noise was so loud that it was uncomfortable for our ears. Everyone stopped and listened, looking for, well, we don't know what. It was almost as if someone had an electronic call blasting in the middle of the meadow, but we would have seen that. I think it was the creature Harry had seen mimicking another animal, and it wanted us confused and to make us afraid. It wanted us out of the area. Everyone had heard Harry's story on this trip. We all wanted out of Santa Claus. We kept hiking until we were out of the area and camped in another spot. Man, that is so strange. Isn't that a strange story? I've never got an encounter story. There may be one on my server that I haven't read yet, but I haven't read one yet from you guys talking about Bigfoot mimicking other animals. But I've heard it before. My friends Mark Newell and Larry Porch talk about that a lot. They're real interested in the audio aspect of Bigfoot, especially Mark. He's got all this sound equipment. He knows how to analyze all these in their partner Shelley, and there's several of them, and they just listen to hours and hours and hours of this noise in the woods. They'll set up microphones in the woods and just let it run for hours or days, and then it all has to be listened to. And they've talked about mimicking before, but I've never gotten a story about it. But this is so cool that I think if it's that loud, you're going to see the crows flying around. You know, when they do that, there's an owl close by or some bird of prey, usually an owl. Crows hate owls. They hate them. But crows will raise sand for 20 or 30 minutes sometimes all day long, if there's something in the area that they don't like. But if they do, you're going to see them. If you just look long enough, you're going to see them in the trees, or you're going to see those big black shapes flying around. To have that much noise going on and it sound to be that close, they would have seen these crows. And I think it was Bigfoot mimicking a murder of crows and trying to run them out of that place. I think that's what it was. All that said, Bigfoot must have a very flexible and varied vocal cord system to be able to mimic other animals that close. But anyway, I'm just rambling on here because this stuff just blows me away. It just blows me away. Anyway, Steve, thank you for this story. It was really good. It's just great. I hate to say it. It's great evidence of things that happen, but it's submitted in a story whereby I think stories are the best evidence we have right now. So, okay, let's move along to another story. I'm going to share with you a story that I received this past June 2019. It's a long story, but it's really good. And what this woman does, her name is Margie. She gives us an outline, hits the high points of it's almost like a 9-year odyssey with Bigfoot. And it's really, really interesting. And I love reading it. And I think you will too. Let's jump into it. She titles it 9 Years Living with Bigfoot. My husband and I are so happy to have found your program and the stories from other listeners. My husband is a psychologist from one of the biggest cities in the world, and over the past 20 years, I have opened him up to nature. My grandfather taught me about nature, tracks, scat, plants, and trees in the Gifford Pinchot Forest of Washington State. We are both with native blood and we follow the ways of our native relatives. In my early adult life, I studied wild canines through Purdue University. After 5 years of study, I had the opportunity to live 14 years in the pure Alaskan tundra with gray timber wolves. I only tell you this so that you and your listeners don't think we're crackpots, since so many, including my son, do not believe that these creatures exist. 9 years ago, my husband and I took on the task of being caretakers and hosts of an educational forest, the same as a camp hosts. We started in September and we moved our RV on site. After living in an RV park, this forest was a breath of fresh air. The forest had many varieties of tall evergreens and a blend of deciduous trees. In the morning, the evergreen tops would look like the tips of flame licking the morning sky as we took our coffee outdoors. Right away, we experienced odd noises and whistles. My husband and I would cook outside on our deck, which was fenced in. Some afternoons we'd be cooking and a strong odor would rise from the undeveloped, heavily timbered valley just over the hill from our house. I always assumed it was something dead, maybe a deer, maybe a cougar kill, but I paid little mind to the things that were natural to the forests. After a day of moving in, we were on our first daylight Kubota ride through 6 miles of roads and trails, and we came upon a recently killed deer in the road. But this wasn't roadkill or a deer killed by a hunter. The deer was boned out, but the carcass was still complete. The only bones we could see left in the animal were its skull and its front legs. Our hearts were pounding because things weren't right. But silly us, we passed it off as a poacher, but I could never square the boned out carcass in my mind. After that, we experienced strange things each day. Usually what happened today would be even more weird than the day before. One of our neighbors was a strange and eccentric woman. This woman would build fires in the woods and dance around the fire in the moonlight alone. She drank a lot of beer and she left cans scattered all about. At night, she would pull up in her camouflage truck and steal firewood from us, or she would sneak around with a bucket, picking all the trillium she could find with a flashlight. We began to think we were living on Murder Mountain. We were constantly nervous. There had been enough craziness from the crazy neighbor girl that we opted to install a night vision camera. We hooked the camera up on a short tripod facing the entrance road so we could manage the crazy neighbor and the occasional carloads of teens looking for a place to party. We felt a bit more secure being able to see what was going on outside our home on a 32-inch TV. During our time there, the corporation allowed a group to use the forest to teach forest survival skills. There were instructors with young students running around in the forest, making overnight survival huts and filling them with leaves. The survival huts looked like fish backbones with the ribs touching the ground to hold it up. After the survivalists left, the corporation asked us to go take the shelters down. It was policy to leave no trace. We completed the task and got them all removed. Not long after this, we started seeing more of these shelters. They were a little larger and more teepee-like. We found an odd one that had a plastic bag stuffed in it. We reported the new shelters to the owner and told him that it appeared the survivalists were back using the woods without permission. The owner was not a nice man and refused to believe what we told him. We never mentioned it again, and we left the shelters alone. The seasons passed, and the odors that we thought were strange at first became normal as we cooked outside. The whistles continued as well as the tree branches breaking in the woods close to our home. Even the occasional green trees falling when there had been no wind became the usual course of events. It was the forest, and we accepted all of it as natural. On a Saturday in 2015, my husband had to check out the undeveloped part of the woods below our RV site. He was gone for hours, and I had become nervous. When he got back, he burst through the door so excited. He had photos of footprints in the mud from a pond we didn't even know was there. But that wasn't all. The trail to the pond was cleared of branches like someone broke them 6 feet high and cleared the way. On his way back, he noticed a cave-style opening in the scrub brush. Inside this thicket stood a large teepee structure. It would have taken several men to build this thing. The opening to this structure and the ground under it showed frequent use. One night we heard noises outside, so my husband went to investigate. He immediately saw something run into the woods and he followed. It sounded like a bull crashing through the forest. And when my husband came back, I laughed and told him that I would never take him hunting and that he made so much noise running through the woods. He told me it was not him making the noise, it was that huge thing running through the woods, and whatever it was as fast as a deer. On nice afternoons, I would take my border collie, Nina, with me to capture nature photographs. The plant life and the wildlife made the whole area magical in my eyes. One day, my dog started tugging at my coat collar. She wanted to go. I would settle her down and she would lay down on the seat, but soon bounce back up and look around, sometimes growling. On many days, as we made our route, she would sit looking out the back screen of the Kubota, growling and shaking. Many times while I was alone in the forest, I would hear men talking. It was garbled speech and nothing could be understood. It was strange. Not far away from a creek was running, and I rode it off as the water making the noises that sounded like men talking. One afternoon, I turned off the main road and drove into this heavily overgrown area. There were small waterfalls with ferns growing close by. Again, it was magical there. There were so many dragonflies there, and I imagined them as fairies flying about. I absolutely loved going there. There was a day finally that I did not feel like I was alone. I got a mental message of being in danger. Without panic, I turned the rig around and took Nina and I back to the main road. I know I was followed from that area for a long distance, but who knows by what. After this experience, I would not accompany my husband while going in the forest anymore. In the spring of 2017, we had just gone to bed, sleeping with the open windows. We got settled in bed, and the biggest, loudest, longest, god-awful yell went off just below our house. We jumped out of bed, speaking in low voices, wondering if it could have been a wolf. But nothing in the forest made that sort of noise. It had to be Bigfoot. Whatever it was, it had the lungs of an elephant because the scream it made seemed to go on forever. I swear I felt the RV shake as the creature bellowed out. A minute later, the same type howl came across several canyons near the Clackamas River drainage area. In our heart of hearts, we knew we were squatched. There was no question that Bigfoot was there. We behaved respectfully, and we didn't hunt for it. We went about our daily lives. In June of 2017, we were returning from a long weekend away, winding around the gravel roads with the brights on, and we always look for deer and other wildlife. On the last stretch of the half-mile road that took us home, we saw the strangest thing. If you've ever seen the movie Predator, you'll get what I mean. From a distance, you could see it moving off the road, but its shape was broken in a strange way. As we got closer to the figure at a normal rate of speed, it bounded onto the road. We could now see its form more clearly. In just 3 steps, it made it across the road right in front of us. It hesitated just as it touched the opposite side of the road. It turned, but not at the neck. It turned at the waist while its left arm was slung back and its right arm was thrust forward. It had stopped to watch us drive by. Its eyes followed us. It was not an inch shorter than 8 feet tall, and the chest looked to be 4 feet wide. Deep red eyes with an orange glow set below a heavy brow just watched us. It turned away from us and was gone like a bird. Our hearts were pounding. I slowed just enough to see the mark in the mud where its foot had gouged out the mud as it climbed the bank into the woods, and the stench left there burned our noses. The next morning, we drove back out to the crossing, which was less than 500 yards away from our front door, and there it was, the slide mark from the toes. It went past the corner of our other neighbor's fence line. We did get photos of the deep impressions in the grass. The stride was several feet between each impression. Not long after our job there was over, it was time to move on. I was going to give the avoided wood knock the night before we left, but darn it, in the busyness of the move, I forgot, so we will never know. Why had I always avoided the wood knock? We didn't want company for dinner. We wanted to live in peace with the natural world around us while we were there. We never once went looking for the Sasquatch inhabiting that area. We believed that the Bigfoot enjoyed our company. Except for the footprints in the teepee nest, we just didn't worry about all the clues there. Even hearing it wasn't proof. That is until we saw it. The point is that the clues were there for the longest time. 9 years of them. It took that visual sighting for everything to come together. From that sighting of Bigfoot back to the first odor, it all began to make sense. Sometimes we do the skin pinch test just to remember that it all really happened. Thank you for sharing our story from the Clackamas County Bigfoot Corridor in Oregon. Signed, Margie. Margie, that is an awesome story. You know, we had a little bit of an email exchange with this. Some of the photographs that you've been seeing in this while this story is narrated are photographs that she took of the area, and they're beautiful. I think I only got about 5 of them, but I put them up, and it looks real Bigfooty. It looks boogery, as we would say in the South. It looks like great habitat for all kind of wildlife, especially Sasquatch. So, Margie, I love this story. You guys had a great experience. I think probably other than Bigfoot, you probably still had a great time. What a great adventure. And wow, you spent 14 years on the Alaskan tundra studying. Were you studying gray wolves or just were there working or what? I wasn't sure about that. But man, what an eventful, adventurous life you've had so far. I'm a little bit jealous. Again, all that said, great story. Thank you. I know everyone enjoyed it and I really appreciate it. Thanks, Margie. Okay, winding up another video. Thank you all for listening this far. I really appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one. Hey, go out and do some of that Christmas shopping. Time is getting near. Santa Claus is coming. Hope you guys are having a Merry Christmas season. We'll see you on the next video. Thanks.